Okay, so hello everyone, and you're very welcome tonight to the Teagasc Kerry Agribusiness Dairy Breeding Webinar. My name is Claire McAuliffe, and I'll be your host for tonight. I'm a dairy advisor working on the Teagasc Kerry Agribusiness Joint Programme, along with my colleagues Dennis Brazel and Mark Tracy, who you'll be hearing from later tonight. So I suppose people are just coming in there on the call now at the moment, so it'll just take a few minutes until everybody's in, and then we'll kick off our meeting tonight. So I suppose tonight we have a panel of speakers this evening, and I suppose we want this to be interactive. So there is a Q&A box down at the bottom of the screen. So if you could please use that to type in your questions that you have as we go through the speakers, and we'll answer. I'll ask any questions on your behalf, and we'll go through it at that. So please feel free to ask any questions as we go, and we'll keep this as interactive as possible. Okay, so I suppose we won't delay. We'll kick off. So tonight we're joined by Mark Tracy, and Mark is a dairy specialist working with Teagasc. He's covering the Kerry Limerick region and the West Cork region, as well as working with myself and Dennis Brazel on the Teagasc Kerry Agribusiness Joint Programme. Mark will be speaking tonight on producing quality heifers from the dairy herd. Next up, we'll have Dr. Siobhan Ring from ICBF, and Siobhan will be speaking on the research of TB incidents within the herds and the genetic links to this, and I suppose how we can select against TB incidents going forward in the national herd. And thirdly, then we'll have Alan Dillon. Alan is a Teagasc beef specialist, and he's working on the Dairy Beef 500 programme. Alan will be speaking on maximising beef from the dairy herd. So I suppose without further ado, I'll hand you over to Mark Tracy, and Mark will take us through the first topic tonight, which is producing quality heifers. Mark, please.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Yeah, so good evening, everyone. I'll just share there. Does that look right to you now, Claire?
Yeah, perfect, Mark.
Perfect. Okay. Right, so look, this evening I just want to talk for a while about, I suppose, breeding high quality replacement heifers. And I suppose at the outset, I would say, in my opinion, all breeding heifers should be AI bred. If you look at your co-op performance reports, probably a little over half the heifers on the ground in the Kerry region are actually AI bred at the moment. And if you look across all the other co-ops in the country, the story isn't much different. So it's a kind of a countrywide issue. So that would be my first point anyway. They need to be AI bred to have the best genetics available. So I suppose what are we trying to actually achieve when we're breeding? This is taken from the ICBF and the Teagasc website, looking at what kind of a cow we're trying to produce. And it seems very bland statement, but really what they're saying is produce a cow that's healthy and resource efficient, is sustainable, and produces calves that can integrate into our beef industry. Okay. But really, when you start to dig into it, it's very much what we have been focusing on for the last number of years anyway, to a large degree. So, like, to me, health is vitally important. You all know the hassles that unhealthy animals in the herd can make, the extra workload from them, but also they're going to last much longer in the herd if they're healthy as well. And Siobhan will go into more detail in that whole area later on. Resource efficient. So I suppose that's where we're getting to the whole idea of breeding maybe slightly smaller cows, that we're using less feed specifically for maintenance, for the cow to function and move around, and being able to partition more energy towards producing milk. But also a big part of being resource efficient is the cow must have the potential to produce a decent level of milk solids. Because at the end of the day, if the cow isn't producing a decent level of milk solids, it doesn't really matter how little she's using for maintenance. It just doesn't really stack up. And then finally, sustainability. Look, we're hearing about it every day. Really, the two areas of sustainability I think that we need to focus on from a breeding point of view is one, being profitable. Again, that comes back to our resource efficiency, our decent output per cow. And then also something new that we can look at in a minute is the whole carbon efficiency. So while farmers aren't receiving a payment for their cows being carbon efficient at the moment, who's to say that that might not come in the future? And at least if we breed the right cows now, we've ourselves future-proofed in that area. The last point there I'm not going to go into because Alan's going to cover that in more detail later. But just it has to be a priority going forward that the calves that we're producing, if they're not being used as replacement heifers, well, the rest of them really do need to be suitable to integrate into our beef industry. So saying that, I suppose, I think at this stage, most people have come around to the idea that the EBI needs to be the driver of our breeding decisions and choosing what stock we're going to breed from. And I suppose the reason I put that slide up is just to give an idea of how many different components are involved in the whole area of EBI. So fertility is probably an area that has been very much in focus over the last number of years. It was probably one of the big weaknesses of the old RBI system. And it's an area that we've seen huge progress over the last number of years in the national herd. But production is actually the biggest component of EBI. So having cows that can produce high levels of fat and protein efficiently is a key driver within the EBI figures. On the left-hand side of the screen, then you'll see some of the other, I suppose, slightly smaller traits. The carbon, which I mentioned before, that's now making up 10% of EBI. The beef sub-index is also making up 10%. And then at the top there, we have maintenance, which gets talked about an awful lot, but is actually only 4% of overall EBI. Management, which comes down to things like temperament and milking speed, is another 4%. And then your calving traits, which is largely driven by gestation length, makes up 7%. And then the final one, which I suppose tees up a lot of what Siobhan's going to talk about in a while, the health sub-index. And I'm hearing more and more people saying that the health is going to become the new fertility. And I think that they're probably on the right wavelength with that. So at the moment, health is making up about 8% of the EBI the EBI overall, and 3% of that is actually directly related to TB. Another 2.5% is cell count, and they really are the two big databases of information that are available within that health sub-index. The other two smaller components, lameness and mastitis. So if we believe that EBI is the driver of where we're going, maybe we'll just look at quickly where have we come from and where have we got to over the last maybe 20 years. And you can see over that period of time, the blue line there is showing that there is significant rise in overall EBI of our animals. And anytime that the financial analysis has been done on the EBI figures, it generally comes out roughly €2 increase in profitability for every €1 increase in EBI. Okay, so financial EBI does seem to be delivering anytime the financials are done on it. The other one that you will see is rising very significantly, and probably one that isn't unexpected, is fertility. And the fertility sub-index has been something that has been very strongly driven within the EBI up to now, and we've seen huge increases in fertility performance of the dairy herd. You'll often hear comments that we're nearly breeding milk out of cows when we're looking at the EBI because we've gone so much into fertility. But this graph certainly doesn't back up that statement. And it's clear that while, yes, fertility has increased, milk sub-index has also increased substantially over that period of time. The calving interval is probably the other one that has gone up quite significantly, and that's largely been driven by improvements in gestation length and that kind of thing. The majority of the other ones have stayed relatively stable. And then I suppose from Alan's point of view, one slight worry is that over time, the beef sub-index has been sliding slightly. Okay, so maybe something just to think on when you're listening to Alan's talk later. So on paper, yes, we've seen huge improvements, but is this actually realizing itself on the ground? So this is ICBF data taken based on 2022. And what ICBF did is they pulled out all the data for the herds and they split them based on average EBI. Okay, so we had the bottom 20%, an average EBI of about €98, ranging all the way up to the top 20% at nearly €100 higher at 196 EBI. All the figures underneath each of those average EBIs, they're the figures relating just to that section. So the bottom 20% based on overall EBI, that's their figures underneath it. Okay, and what you'll see is that there's a general trend that as EBI increases, so do all the KPIs that we're actually looking at. So if we just compare the top 20% herds to the average, the top 20% herds, they had roughly €40 higher overall EBI. They produce more milk in terms of litres, and they also produce more solids, nearly 50 kilos more solids per cow. Percentages were stronger. Because of that, milk price was also stronger. The percentage of replacements bred from AI was also much higher. Now, I don't think that's directly related to EBI, but it shows the mindset of that cohort of farmers. Average calving interval was better as a smaller number, shorter number. 6-week calving rate was also higher. And then I suppose, importantly, looking at the whole carbon area, these cows were also more efficient in terms of kilos of carbon emitted for every kilo of fat and protein corrected milk solids produced. Okay, so all the KPIs go the right direction when EBI is followed. Just looking at it in a little bit more detail, and I suppose the key thing I think with EBI is I showed you how many different components there at the start. To me, herds have different strengths and weaknesses, and as farmers, you need to drill down more into the actual EBI figures when you're choosing what animals you're going to breed from. This slide here is for a herd that I used to work with before, and each blue dot here represents an actual cow within that herd. So what we're looking at here is along the bottom axis there, along the x-axis, that's showing the PD for, in this case, fat. Okay, so the genetic, I suppose, strength of the animal for producing fat. And then the y-axis, or the going up along the page, we're looking at what actual percentage of fat did that cow deliver on average for the year based on milk recording within that herd. And you can see there's a very, very strong correlation between the genetics and what's actually delivered on the ground. So cows that had poor genetics for fat tended to produce lower percentages than cows that had the high genetics. And the R squared there of 0.73, that's very, very high, strong correlation. That's basically saying that about 73% of the variation between the cows can be attributed to their genetics. Okay, the other 25 or 30% comes down to how the animals are actually managed and other factors like that. When we use the same herd and we look at protein, we get a very, very similar picture. An R squared is 66%, which again is very, very strong. Okay, so generally what we do see on herds is the herds that have the genetics to do high percentages of solids, they tend to deliver high percentages of solids. Okay, and it's a much, much stronger correlation than if we looked at the PD for kilos of actual milk. That would be a much, much weaker correlation. Probably the flip side, probably only about a third of it being directly related to the actual genetics. So I just pulled out two herds that I use to work with then, looking at, let's pause that. Looking at firstly their overall genetics, and then looking at how they actually performed on the ground. So these two herds, both grass-based spring calving herds, both in the same discussion group, both located within probably half a mile of each other. Okay, so in terms of geography, soil type, all those sort of things, very, very similar. The overall EBI of herd 1 was €30 higher than herd 2. About €10 of that was made up due to fertility, another €10 difference in maintenance subindex, and the remaining 10 then just all the other components of overall EBI. But interesting, the milk subindex of the two herds was very, very similar, 64 versus 62. But when we drill down into the actual milk subindex, they were coming from two different ways. Okay, so herd 1, PD for kilos of milk of 41, very strong PD for fat and protein. Herd 2, a higher PD for actual kilos of milk, but weaker genetics for percentages. Okay, but obviously had the genetic potential still to deliver significant levels of kilos of fat and protein. So when we pull out their co-op performance reports for last year and look at how these herds actually delivered, and those figures are based on what animals were in the herd on the 1st of August last year. So those figures do represent the herd of cows that was actually milking last year. And what we see is that herd 2, while it had much stronger genetics for kilos of milk produced, the actual level of litres of milk delivered was very, very similar between the two herds. Only about 37 litres difference between the two herds. However, we also see that the herd 1, that had the strong genetics for percentages, delivered much, much better fats and proteins than herd 2. And as a result of that, ended up producing an extra 34 kilos of milk solids per cow. When we also factor in then that the higher percentages led to a better milk price, overall, herd 1 was receiving an extra revenue of about €220 per cow, or over an 80 cow herd, that's nearly €18,000 per year. Okay, so significant increase in output, driven largely by the genetics, and particularly the genetics for percentages within that actual herd. I suppose just something that it's in focus the whole time, looking at how many cows we need to carry with nitrates rules and all this kind of thing. I know revenue isn't the be end all, but like herd 2 needs to carry 7% more cows just to generate the same amount of revenue. And both herds would have had relatively similar cost base. If anything, herd 2 probably has a slightly higher cost base, feeding slightly more concentrate. So looking then at actually producing these quality heifers, to me there's a number of steps. And I suppose at the top of that graph there, we have selecting sires. To me, that's the last step involved in this whole process. But it's probably the first thing an awful lot of farmers will do. We'll pick up the glossy brochures, or we'll download the active bull list, or we'll look at it in the journal, or whatever it is, and we'll pick out our team bulls, and then we'll try and figure out how we're going to use them. But to me, we need to go right back to the start. Something that I'm seeing on farm an awful lot at the moment is surplus heifers in herds. So there's probably a couple of reasons for it. One, fertility has improved. So that means we probably need a few less heifers than we did before, but also we're probably generating a few more than we needed. And also then, I suppose we call it the carryover effect from the whole expansion phase that had been going on over the last number of years, where it was always nice to have a few spare heifers in the system in case an opportunity came along. So first thing I think we need to look at is how many heifers are required, and then how many straws we actually need to use to generate that number of heifers. We then need to look at the actual breeding goals for the herd, okay, and look at what are the strengths and weaknesses and what are we going to go after. Breeding is a slightly slow game, okay. We can't chop and change our breeding goals every year. We need to put a set of goals in place for a number of years and follow through with them to achieve big improvements. We then need to look at our dams, and I'll just show you a quick way of sorting the cows, because at the end of the day, half the genetics of your heifer will come from the cow. So we can have the best bulls in the world, but if the cows aren't much use, okay, we're on the back foot straight away. And then the final step, which I won't go into much detail tonight, is actually selecting sires. So just looking at how many heifers or straws do we require, the optimum replacement rate, okay, anytime that it's looked at in research, is about 18%. But you need to look at your own herd to determine exactly what the optimum rate for your herd is, because it will change slightly depending on either fertility issues. Maybe you have a very old herd or a very young herd. That will affect how many heifers you want to bring in. Are you looking to breed extra replacements to sell? Are there other issues there? Okay. Look at the typical conception rates achieved in your herd, because they do vary. You need to look at, are you breeding just the cows, or are you also going to breed from your incoming heifers? And then I suppose the other big thing to look at is, are you going for sex semen or just conventional? So we'll look at two different examples here. The figures I've used here are the kind of the standard conception rates for the different scenarios. So with conventional semen, we're looking at a conception rate of about 70% on heifers, 60% on cows, and for sex semen, 60% on heifers and 50% on cows. Okay, but as I say, have a quick look at your own herd of what you've been achieving the last few years when you're doing the maths yourself. Just in percentage female, if we're using conventional straws, we would expect 50-50 female male ratio. If we're using sex straws, we would expect 90% plus of the calves to come out as females. So the two examples we're going to look at, roughly 100 cow herd. So we want 18 heifers being produced. Well, 20 heifers being produced to have 18 coming into the herd, so a couple of spares in the system. Okay. The first example, all conventional semen. The second example, exact same scenario, but we will also use sex semen. So if we look at example 1, if we breed our heifers, the 18 heifers there, we would expect to produce 6 heifer calves if using conventional semen. So that's simply multiplying the 18 by 0.7 because it's 70% conception rate, by 0.5 because it's 50% females. That means we now need another 14 heifer calves from somewhere. So obviously they're going to have to come from the cows. And in order to generate 14 heifers from our cows, we need to use another 47 dairy straws on the cows. That means in total that there are 65 animals being bred to dairy within that scenario. If we look at example 2 then, where we're going to use sex semen, the 18 heifers will now produce 10 heifer calves. Okay, slightly lower conception rate, but a much higher ratio of females to males. So we end up with more heifer calves. This means we now only need another 10 heifer calves coming from the dairy cows. And in order to generate that with sex semen, we would only need to use 22 dairy straws. So overall, there's only 40 animals bred to dairy AI. But I think significantly there, the number of cows that we need to breed from in that example has dropped down significantly, down to only 22 animals. Okay, so it allows us to be very, very selective on which cows we're going to breed from. And that's why I think we need to focus on looking at the cows before we start our breeding program. If the farmer decided that they weren't going to use the heifers in the breeding program, we get a similar picture. In the case of example 1, using conventional semen, we're looking at about 67 straws being required versus 45 in the sex semen scenario. So in terms of identifying breeding goals, I just have 2 different herds to show. This first herd, okay, an excellent herd, very, very well managed, strong legacy of winter milk in this herd, delivering very high levels of output per cow, okay. Probably not a believer in EBI in the early years, but has very much come around to the way of thinking of EBI. So this herd, when we look at its strengths and weaknesses, obviously the big strength of that herd is the milk subindex. It's in the top 6% nationally for milk subindex. Okay. The other big strength, and teeing up against Siobhan's stuff, this herd is in the top 5% or top 4% for health subindex. So very healthy cows. The big weakness of this herd, okay, to me, is its fertility subindex. It's in the bottom 20% for fertility nationally, and it would be something that if you looked at the herd's KPIs for fertility, it would be something that would feature that the herd does struggle to retain cows at times. Okay, so to me, this herd, the big focus needs to be on fertility. Okay. The other interesting one, and when I've shown this to people at times, another one that they hone in on very quickly is the maintenance subindex. This herd is one of the lowest ranked nationally for maintenance subindex. -€2 for EBI. That's putting these cows in mid-third lactation at a body weight of somewhere with 650 kilos per cow. Okay, so they're big cows. That's also what's actually one of the factors that's driving the carbon subindex so negative, that plus the big output potential of the cows. To me, the maintenance subindex is not something that I would drive hard at a farmer over. Okay, as long as farmers you understand that breeding slightly smaller cows reduces the amount of feed that they need just to maintain themselves. And I suppose that's the key thing there. That's where the saving of going for the smaller cow is. Okay. A maintenance subindex of 0, that's a cow of about 640 kilos body weight. And for every euro, it's about 5 kilos body weight. So for example, if you had an animal there that was plus 10 euro, that will be about 50 kilos lighter than the average, so about 590 kilos body weight. So that herd, to me, fertility is the key driver that they need to be going after. If we look at this other herd again in the same discussion group, has been after EBI for quite a while, a different type of system, much more higher stocking rate, grass-based type system. Overall in EBI, it's in the top 10% nationally. Fertility subindex, it's in the top 5% nationally. Okay. To me, this herd needs to focus on 2 key areas. It needs to look at increasing the milk subindex because it's not even in the top 40% nationally. Okay. And the other big thing I think this herd needs to go after is looking at the health subindex because it's in the bottom 20% nationally for health. Okay, so they're the 2 big things that I would see that herd needing to work on. So knowing what we're after, we can now start selecting dams to suit these roles and selecting bulls to suit these roles. So an area that I think we need to do an awful lot more work in a lot of herds is picking out the right cows. So we can do this with sire advice, but personally I think we need to do a bit of homework beforehand. And the reason I say that is with sire advice, we can't see as much information as we have available to us in other ways. So where I think we need to do is filter within the profiles of your ICBF Herd Plus. So go into, in this example, I'm going to go into the EBI profile, but you could, if you wished, go and look at your milk recording data in this way as well, and it's the exact same process. So you just go down to profiles, across to dairy, and then in this case EBI, and you click on that. So this is an example of what you'll see. You'll see all your animals listed out and a whole series of ways of filtering up on top. So there's 2 ways that we can use this tool here. One, we can pick out a bunch of animals that we don't want to breed from and note them down and click them off for maybe beef breeding only when we go into our sire advice program. Or the other way some people prefer to do it is they use this with a number of different parameters to generate a list of their, say, top 20 or 40 cows, whatever it may be, that they want to breed from. So in this case, I've gone for the option of I'm trying to pick out all the animals that have negative health subindex, and I'm not going to breed from that list of animals then. So what I've done across the top here, I've set the to date to the 1st of January 2024. So that rules out all this year's calves. So any animals in the list below here now have a birth date before the 1st of January 2024. For the sex, I've selected female to rule out all the males. And then over on above the health, I've put the to box to 0. So that means that in that list below, all the animals that are listed there have a health subindex from as however low that herd is, in this case minus 9.4 up to 0. Okay, so that list now is a list. It's a total of 40 animals out of 190 animals in the herd that have negative health subindex. That list could then be carried across into your sire advice and click them off as beef only. Okay, you could do the exact same process for whatever parameter you want to focus on, be it milk subindex, fertility, percentages of fat and protein. Okay, whatever you decide is the key priority within your herd for your breeding program. The final section then, I suppose, looking at selecting sires. I'm not going to go into much detail in this area, but just a few key things I suppose we need to keep in mind. Okay, the first thing is select your sires based on your breeding objectives. Okay, the right bulls for your herd may not be the right bulls for your neighbor's herd. Okay, like we looked at a minute ago, the two different herds we put up, both excellent herds, super farmers, both very profitable herds. Both of them have very, very different criteria in terms of what types of bulls that they would be selecting. Use the sire advice program, okay? If you're trying to filter bulls inside sire advice, there's over 1,000 bulls available to you. So the sire advice is a nice way of being able to quickly narrow down the animals to a more manageable list that you can do, I suppose, a bit more deep investigation into. The other big benefits of the sire advice, one, it'll actually allocate the bulls to the specific cows for you in order to get a nice kind of even herd. And then the big thing, it'll avoid inbreeding, so it'll do the back checks in the breeding for you. Big thing, use enough bulls. Okay, so minimum 7 bulls, and then as your herd gets bigger, over 100 cows, you need to be adding more bulls in. Okay, that is really there as a safeguard to ensure that we increase the overall reliability of the team. So because of that, we have to actually use them evenly. And the max amount of heifers that should be generated off one sire is 15%. So what you'll see quite often is you'll see herds where they might have used 10 or 12 bulls as they were supposed to, but when you look at the crop of heifers on the ground, you can see that maybe 50% of the heifers came from just 2 of the bulls. So they picked a good sized team of bulls, but then they strongly used 1 or 2 favorite bulls within it. And that can often happen when there's certain bulls being picked as part of a sex program and that kind of thing. Or the other place it can happen quite commonly is picking 1 or 2 very easy calving bulls to use on your heifers. So just be careful of that one. Okay. The reason that it's so important to use the team of bulls is explained in this slide here. And this is the impact of reliability, okay? So if we take an animal having an EBI of 0, as the reliability increases, the level of variation then decreases. So if we take an animal at say the left-hand side, the extreme left-hand side of this chart with 0 reliability, if the reliability is 0, sure, it means pretty much nothing. So the EBI is 0, but in theory, it could go up or down an awful lot. In this case, nearly 300 plus or minus. Okay. As we move to the right and the animal becomes more reliable, the figures become more reliable. The level of variation, there'll still be a level of variation there, but the level of variation decreases. Okay. But what's very important to see there is that even when we move quite far to the right to what would be considered proven bulls, there's still the potential for a substantial amount of variation. And I suppose just to have an idea, 30% reliability, you could have stock bulls with reliabilities down at that kind of a level. Okay, so huge variation. 50% reliability, genomic sires coming in could have reliability of that. But a proven sire could be as low as 70% reliability. So even using proven sires, we still have a chance of substantial variation. So the way to get around that is to use a team of animals. And I suppose really what you're doing in a lot of ways is you're spread betting. So at least if one animal turns out to be a lot poorer than we expected, at least it's not a huge percentage of the heifers sired by that sire at the end of the day. My final slide, okay, it's a slide I don't really like, okay, but farmers often ask for it and they like this slide. So I suppose it's getting the idea of what sort of figures should be on your team of animals. So in terms of fertility, we know that a herd with a fertility subindex of somewhere around 105 or a little with it should be able to achieve the key performance figures for fertility. Okay. As a team, we're looking for fertility subindex somewhere around 130, but we probably can accept bulls down to maybe €90 within that team. In terms of milk, the suggested figure is a team average of €100. To me, you need to drill way down into that figure and look at what's generating that milk figure. and is it in kind of looking at the same things as what you're trying to achieve? Health, I think that's one that we need to push stronger. Definitely positive, no negative bulls, and a team average of about €5. Carbon, positive, both for bulls and the team. And then maintenance, again, as I said earlier, not something that I think really there is a right or wrong to, but the suggested team there is about 10 to €20. What I would say to you on the maintenance one is have a look at your maintenance sub-index. If you're happy with the size of your herd of cows, or you're happy with maybe the cows that you would think are the nicest cows within the herd, look at their sub-index and pick a team of bulls with a similar sub-index to that. If you want to make your herd smaller, increase the sub-index, and if you want to make the cows a bit bigger again, reduce the figure slightly. But I think, look, the biggest messages I would have out of that is drill down into the actual figures for the stock that you're breeding, and invest plenty of time in picking the best bulls and the best cows, because at the end of the day, the cow is making up half of the genetics. So I'll leave it at that, Claire.
Okay, super. Thanks very much, Mark. So just before we head to our next speaker, there's just 2 questions in, and I'll remind our audience that there is a Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask any questions as we go with any of our speakers, and I'll ask them on your behalf. It's just myself and the panelists that can see the questions coming in. So I suppose just one question there, Mark. What's the quickest way to get a higher milk price from the herd? I have yield, but I need protein.
Well, in that case, you strongly breed for percentage protein. Make that, I suppose, your key breeding goal to go after. So probably start filtering bulls on maybe 0.2 protein. See what kind of a list of bulls you're coming up with. I find the easiest way is go very, very aggressive on it. You'll find you've hardly any bulls available to you, and then maybe ease off slightly on the figure till you get a respectable team of bulls. But maybe 0.3 for fat, 0.2 for protein as a kind of starting point, and play around up and down then to see to get a team the right kind of size that you want there.
Okay, perfect. And the second question, what's Mark's thinking of buying in heifers and not bothering rearing my own?
Yeah, so I think it is something that a lot of herds should look at. I suppose some smaller herds, a small little bunch of heifers are nearly an inconvenience around the place at times. So from that point of view, that's one thing to look at. I suppose the average animals in one herd could be far superior to the best animals in another herd. So if you're looking at your overall EBI figures, if your herd is very weak in overall EBI, no matter how well you pick your bulls, you're always going to be behind the curve, because as you're improving, the national average and the best farmers are also moving ahead of you as well. So it's very, very hard to catch up. So I would be very positive to the idea of buying heifers. But what I would say is it's not a case of just going out and looking up Dundee or going to the mart for heifers. I would be going to firstly think of a herd that is the type of herd that you want to end up with. Okay. So that has the same kind of breeding goals that you want. Go approach one of those farmers and do a deal with them that you're going to buy X number of heifers for the next 5 years from them. Okay. The reason for that is you're going to minimize disease risk, and disease is probably the biggest risk factor with this whole scenario. Okay. From a money point of view, it is a cash flow issue in that you're going to have to write a big check to buy your heifers. But overall, when you actually do crunch the numbers on it, it costs as much to produce these heifers as you're going to pay for them, give or take anyway. So in terms of profitability, I don't think it's going to have any issue that way. But just you're going to have to put a few pennies aside to pay for them every year.
Okay, super. Thanks, Mark. So I'll ask you to stop sharing your screen, and I'll hand you over to Siobhan Ring of ICBF, and Siobhan is going to take us through some of the research between the genetic links with TB and as how we can select bulls against this. So thanks, Mark, and over to you, Siobhan.
Okay, you might let me know there, Claire, when you can see the right presentation mode?
Yeah, perfect. Good to go.
Great. Okay, perfect. So look, as Claire said, look, my name is Siobhan Ring and I work for the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation. And just tonight, I'm going to kind of, piggyback off of what Mark was talking about, but drill into one of the newer health traits. So that is breeding for TB resistance. And the reason for that, as you all know, look, TB is like a massive problem, has been for the last 50, 60 years, but it's actually increasing over the last, I suppose, about the last 5 years. It's becoming much more of an issue. So last year there were about 5,000 herds that were restricted, which is an additional 100 compared to the previous year. And what's more is that the number of reactors within a herd is also increasing. So that essentially kind of means that your lockdown period might be longer and the number of animals that will be taken is more. And that's not just influenced by the fact that herds are now that little bit larger. You can see here kind of in this graph that the department did up, you can see there's a few hotspots there. If you look in the Kerry area, the likes of Listowel, Lixnaw, and in Limerick, there's a few areas that have kind of become more prominent over like the previous year. We know the typical guidelines that have been given to us to try and deter TB from the herd. So like biosecurity, wildlife control, and increased testing regimes. But there's also something that you can do within the farm gate, and it's specifically just during the breeding season. So when you're picking your bulls and you that you want to sire your dairy replacement, you can look at this individual figure. So it's like what Mark was talking about, drilling down into one individual figure, see if you can improve your genetic resistance to TB. So look, I'm just going to go through, I suppose, a little small bit of the background as into where this kind of came about, and then I'll show you exactly how you can use it. So first off, I suppose, look, the way this kind of started a couple of years ago, the first evidence of genetic resistance to TB came about. Is so we got a bit of data from the Department of Agriculture on restricted herds, and took sires that had several progeny spread across multiple herds, each of which were undergoing a TB outbreak. And what we saw is that there was huge variation in the prevalence of TB in their progeny. So what I have here is, look, on the vertical axis with the laser here, I'm showing you the number of bulls, and on the horizontal axis, I have the prevalence of TB in their progeny. So what you'll see, first off, I suppose, is there's huge variation within that. But what I want to drill in here is, I suppose, this green bar here represents the average prevalence of TB in a bull's progeny. But on the left-hand side of the graph here, you'll see that there are bulls where less than 5% of their progeny were diagnosed with TB, even though they were in herds that had TB infection. Whereas on the right-hand side here, there were bulls in the same herds as this left-hand side of the graph, where 30 to 40% of those sires progeny actually went down as TB reactors. So look, long story short, I suppose we're now able to differentiate which bulls are more prone to having TB. So, that information is now available, and it's there on all animals. So you can see it for your own cows or your own heifers, but also more importantly, where you can make the decisions to kind of to reduce that, it's also available on AI bulls and stock bulls as well. So what we often get asked, I suppose, is, well, if you've never had TB or it's not a problem for your herd, then how can you give us a figure for TB genetic resistance? So it's the exact same concept actually as any other trait that we've looked at. So take, for example, herds that are not milk according. Those herds still have milk genetic merits for their animals, even though they don't contribute to the evaluation itself. And for TB, it's exactly the same. So what I have here is just an example. I've got 3 different herds where these herds have been restricted due to TB in the past, and their ancestry is also known. So test results from the routine skin test as well as factory data fed into the Department of Agriculture, which in turn comes into the ICBF database now. When those animals were born or were genotyped, their ancestry information also fed into that ICBF database. So it's the link here between the two things. So it's the actual, the raw data, as we call it. So the test result and the pedigree information come into the database. And then what we have here is for this group of herds over here on the right. These herds have never been restricted, so we don't use their TB information. And the reason for that is we can't be sure that they were actually exposed to the bacterium that causes TB. So therefore we don't include them. But we do look at their ancestry information. And that information, as I say, when they were born and registered or genotyped, feeds into the ICBF database. And from that, we know there are genetic links between animals in all these different herds. So just take, for example, here the animals that I've highlighted in red. We know that each of these are sired by one specific AI bull. And these animals here in yellow are also sired by another specific AI bull. And from that, we're able to derive links between animals that had the test results within the restricted herds and those that did not. And out we get is our TB breeding values. And as I say, it's exactly the same for any trait that we look at when it comes to milk or fertility or health or whatever it might be. So I suppose to see then, do these breeding values actually work? And so this is something that I've repeated multiple times. But just to briefly go through one scenario is, to see if the breeding values can actually accurately predict the outcome of TB infection in an animal's lifetime. So I've taken 150,000 calves, and the breeding values of those calves would be available for them at birth. So it's the exact same scenario as today. Every calf will have a TB breeding value, and that's based simply on knowing its sire and dam and knowing their genetic predisposition to going down with TB. So based on that animal's genetic merit for TB, we classify them as being high risk or low risk of becoming a TB reactor. And simply based on that differentiation, I suppose, between the two groups, we follow those animals throughout their lifetime. They went through the normal testing procedure. They had their routine annual skin tests or more if that was required in the area. The animals were eventually sent to slaughter, and obviously they would have been tested there as well. And what we find is that those animals that we said were genetically high risk of going down with TB as a reactor, either at the skin test or in the factory, 9.3% of those actually had TB. And for those that we said were low risk of being TB reactors, 6.9% of those had TB. So that's a 26% less TB reactors in those that were in the low risk group, for basically that they had better genetics for TB. So what we're saying is it's not an absolute foolproof mechanism. It doesn't mean that the low risk animals aren't going to get TB, but it does mean that they will have significantly less TB in their lifetime. And what we often hear, I suppose, is, one infection, how many more animals, we'll say if you've got one cow with TB, then she can infect an additional 10 cows. But if you've got all your cows, I suppose, more, that more resistant genotype, there is less and less chance that they are also going to become TB reactors themselves. Okay, so look, the first thing to note is, I suppose, in regards to the TB, so what are you looking for from a figure perspective? So what we've actually done in some of the AI bull lists is kind of color code them in terms of, how good or bad they are for TB resistance. So we've kind of done it like a traffic light system. So red is kind of, stop, bad genetics for TB, and green then is more like where you would, where you'd rather be selecting the bulls. And you'll note within that as well. So the way we present this figure, the value is indicative of, I suppose, the percentage of a bull's progeny expected to be TB reactors if there is a lockdown, right? So that would mean that higher numbers are bad. So the lower that you can get that TB figure, the better. On average, dairy AI bulls are coming in at about 8%. So all herds should be trying to use a bull with a figure of less than 8%. So it doesn't matter if you've never had a problem with TB before, because breeding for TB resistance, it's actually like a proactive approach. It's not, you know, it's not something that you react to when you've had a problem, because the bulls that you're using now will be the cows that are in your herd 4 or 5 years time. So like it's very much kind of almost a bit like vaccination, you know, you're trying to prevent the problem occurring in the first place. So that's kind of saying basically a minimum use bulls that are at least less than 8%. And ideally, the lower that you can get that figure, the better. So, you know, for herds that have had a problem in the past and really are going to go aggressively for it, if you could try and figure under 6.5%, see what bulls you're left with that fit your criteria in and around, you know, what Mark was talking about as regards those goal traits that you would be looking for. Try to get that TB figure as low as possible. So where you find the figure anyway, you can find all these things on the ICBF website. So if you go to icbf.com, we have a tab there called Genetic Valuations, TB and Liver Fluke, and then there's a file there of active bulls. And within that, you can see each of the TB figure, we'll say for each animal. So it's, you know, the PTA is the genetic merit, like we have for all the other traits, with the reliability figure. And there's some details there on, you know, the actual level of TB reactors in herds. And then we have the EBI details itself. So that's a page specifically for just looking at TB, but within each of the active bull lists that you would be familiar with, you know, just we'll say the normal active bull lists that are there on the downloadable for Excel that comes with those, the TB figure is located within that. So all you have to remember is look for the lowest figure on TB once you're fitting all your other criteria as well for the other traits. If you're looking for an individual animal, if you're trying to see how good or bad they are for TB, so say for example you're thinking of going buying a stock bull, or you've got a cow there and you want to look her up, again, but on the ICBF website, there's a function there called the animal search. If you go into that, all you need to do is insert the animal's tag or AI code, and then what will come up is there's this tab here called TB and Liver Fluke that you can click on, and it'll give you that TB PTA figure again. So this guy is 10.4 and he's color coded in red. So this guy is actually quite high on the TB front. So he's not a guy that I would, you know, like to be using on my herd if I could at all avoid it. Maybe there's other bulls that would fit the criteria in terms of, you know, EBI or DBI, whatever, whether it's a dairy bull or a beef bull, they all have this figure. So try to be looking at that as well. And of course, the AI companies, this is just 3 examples here. All the AI companies are kind of promoting, I suppose, the bulls that are more TB resistant. So say, for example, Eurogene there, they've given a list of about 10 of them in and around the front page. Dobea have a kind of a TB resistant flag on some of the bulls, and Munster Bovine as well. Then you can see there, they've put the TB figure as well for each of their individual bulls. And if you're not sure, ask your technician. And I suppose if we think about how the EBI was kind of derived and how it kind of got driven over the last number of years, it's by farmers kind of looking for the information and, you know, demanding that the better bulls are there. So if you're kind of looking for bulls that are more TB resistant, tell the technicians, tell your advisors, let them know that you want better bulls on this, because nobody wants TB. But unless you're going to kind of, you know, be adamant out there that that's you won't accept anything better than that, you might be getting kind of possibly inferior bulls. So look, in summary, breeding for TB resistance, it's a proactive solution. So if you've got a problem today and you haven't been breeding for it, it's not necessarily going to fix the problem. You need to be thinking about 4 or 5 years down the line. So this is a free tool. It doesn't cost any money relative to, you know, all the tools that are out there. The breeding values are available on all animals, so you can download your own animals as well on the EBI profile within the ICBF website. You can look up individual animals on the animal search, and when you're choosing bulls, those active AI bull lists are there. And as I say, for all herds, you should be trying to select bulls that have a TB figure of less than 8. And if you can at all, use a figure of less than 6.5%. But obviously, you're trying to look after those other traits as well, and, you know, milk, fertility, etc., to optimize the herd. So that's it for me, Claire. So a short summary.
Okay, super. Thanks very much, Siobhan. There was 2 questions in there, but I think you kind of covered them in that were the bulls in the first trial published, and what bulls were at 5% and the higher percentage for TB incidents? And in the second question, why is TB not on the catalogue? So I suppose it is there on those catalogues now, being worked into it.
Yeah, it's in the catalogues there. So look, I just for a reason, I suppose that they're the main used companies. It's in all those three catalogues. So they are showing it, and without disgracing any bulls, maybe I'll tell the farmers to go look at the website and go look at which individual bulls were really bad. I can tell you they're long gone now. We're probably lucky in the sense that, you know, say we have popular bulls, but they don't stick around for very long. So if a bull was a problem before and we didn't know he was really bad for TB, you know, he could have got, you know, 50 or 60,000 doses of semen would have got out. And he'd have been very popular and he could have created a huge problem. But thankfully today, that isn't so much of an issue because the bull will be moved on again.
Okay, super. Thanks very much, Siobhan. So I suppose we'll introduce Alan Dillon, and Alan is a Teagasc beef specialist and he's working on the Dairy Beef 500 programme, and Alan is going to speak on maximising beef from the dairy herd. Thanks very much, Alan.
Okay, can you see that okay there?
Yeah, perfect.
Right, okay. So basically, right, I'm going to talk a bit about the dairy, the beef side of dairy, I suppose, and your decisions are going to come very soon in terms of I suppose selecting your bulls or beef bulls once you've made your decision on what you want to breed for your replacement heifers. So right, if we look at the makeup of, I suppose, beef calves in Ireland, they come from the dairy herd, there's around 1.15 million. Okay, that's increasing a bit every year. And if you look at the breakdown, there's about 30% of them are exported or slaughtered, up to recently, or has died. 35% remain on dairy farms for various stages. So that might mean they're finished on the farm, but they could be there for the first year or maybe a year and a half or whatever. And the remainder are bought by beef farmers. Okay. So this means it's about, in terms of beef farms, there's around 10,000 beef farms that are actually buying calves. And they don't buy a massive number, about 37 on average, okay? And I suppose the big challenge we see for this is there's a huge attrition rate with dairy calf to beef, okay? It's for every 10 farmers that buy calves this year, there'll only be 4 of them still at it next year, and in 5 years' time, should I say. Okay, so 6 out of every 10 drop out over a 5-year period. And obviously they're replaced by other farmers that come back on stream, but the attrition rate is very high. Look, for a variety of reasons. Okay. So look, these were a lot of, I suppose, headlines we've been reading over the last while. Essentially, calf slaughterings are not allowed anymore if you want to keep your word be. I suppose there's always that little threat hanging over us, I suppose. Is there going to be a problem with live exports? It might necessarily mean that the exports stop going out of the country, but will the countries we export them to continue to take them, such as Holland and that? We don't know what their plans are. There was a bit of a kickback on some of these calf imports into the countries like Holland, which may create a problem for us down the line. We don't know. Okay, so we don't just look at a few figures that we're seeing, and there's a bit of a decline in the quality of calves, I suppose, over the last number of years. So if we look across in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see there, right, dairy or beef dairy calves. Just 29% of them are coming in under 280 kilos of carcass. Now, if we talk to any factory processor, there's not too many want a carcass under 280. If they do, it's a very few in the load. They don't want too many. The spec generally is going kind of, 280 to 380 or 400 kilos or thereabouts for most processors. The dairy ones is less than falling out of spec. Generally, Friesians tend to weigh that bit better. And it's 18% of them under 280. They are killed that little bit older, I suppose. That's probably the other side of it as well. Okay, so over the last 10 years, the genetic trend has shown a 5 kilo drop in carcass weight and a 0.2 unit drop in carcass population. Right, so I suppose this is moving on. Your social license, I suppose, to keep milking cows is probably going to be based to a certain degree on your ability to produce a decent dairy beef calf that's going to be valued and purchased by someone who wants to rear it through to the finish at 2 years of age or whatever the age is. Okay, and this is where the sustainability element comes in terms of it's linking in with the environment and social acceptance, etc. Right. So I suppose if we want to see, right, what is one of the big things that really influences, I suppose, guys buying calves, and I would say, right, there's a few things there on that slide you see in front of you. You want return customers, you want quality genetics, and animal performance well, but I think that one up the top is number one for anyone buying calves. If you look at the numbers that have been bought, you're buying less than 40 calves. You're probably talking that most of your customers are going to be part-time farmers, okay? And what are part-time farmers very, very poor in? It's time. And the one thing that takes up a hell of a lot of time is a sick calf. There is more work with one sick calf than there is in 30 healthy ones. So number one, I would say, is have those calves healthy. Ensure they get plenty colostrum. If you can vaccinate them, all the better. It's a huge bonus for anyone buying the calves. Be sure the navels are right and use plenty straw. You know, the last thing any farmer going into a dairy farmer's yard wants to see is a yard where, you know, calves are not being bedded right. They might be lying in a bit of, you know, dirty straw, a bit of muck or whatever, and rake on top. They want to see the calves in a nice, clean, warm, healthy environment. Calves that look full, calves that are shiny, calves that are healthy, and they also want calves with a bit of age. Okay, so how can you improve calf quality? Right, look, everyone has a different breed preference. In a lot of parts of the country, look, the Angus and the Hereford are probably still, you know, they're always good old sellers. Especially where I'm here in Limerick, there's a big demand for Hereford and into Tipperary as well. I would say, look, you pick the appropriate sires for your maidens, your second calvers, and your mature cows. Okay, so you know it's a different type of bull that goes onto each of these. It's an easy calving one. You know, you could probably sacrifice some of the carcass characteristics for maidens. You can up it a little bit there, up to something a bit higher spec for the second calvers, and then you can go for, you know, some of your harder calving bulls and, you know, high carcass merit bulls as well for your mature cows. And look, you know, high carcass and high calving difficulty don't go hand in hand as much as people think. There are plenty of bulls out there that will show you that, you know, are very good in terms of carcass performance, but would not be that hard calving. It would be quite easy. Okay, I would say, look, for whatever breed you're going for, pick the highest carcass weight and beef sub-index within your calving range. So you want to pick the best bull going. So that means, you know, if there's 5 bulls there and they've got kilos of carcass of from +2 to +10, you know, you pick the one that's 10. You don't pick the one that's 2. You pick the best one going. Ensure, please, and record the sire of the calf. And that, I don't mean just record the breed. Put down the bull that the calf is by. In a lot of the schemes nowadays, that, you know, that farmers are selling cattle through, they have to have a sire recorded, such as ABP Advantage Scheme or the Keep Back 2020 Club and these type of things. You know, they want a sire down, and guessing them isn't much use. If you're in the genotyping scheme, look, that's all sorted for you. I would say, look, use the DBI and pay particular interest attention to the beef sub-index, and we'll go into that now in a second. So this is the DBI, the dairy beef index, right? So it's just a snapshot of what it means, right? And basically, it identifies beef bulls are suitable for dairy herd. So I would say almost any bull within the DBI, if you look at the top 40, 50 anyway, at least, would have no trouble. They're generally short gestation. They're generally easy calving. And most of them would have good carcass traits. But you do have to pay attention to this. And I'll show in a second what I mean. Okay, so the sub-index, right, within this is based on, the sub-indexes are based on calving, which is calving difficulty and gestation length. So that makes up 29%. The beef sub-index then, which is, you know, your carcass weight, your carcass conformation, factory spec, etc. And then you have your calving sub-index, right, which is gestation, carcass weight, and age of slaughter. Okay. Sorry there now. Press a button here to go on again. Okay. So look, if we're to look into DBI, I've just picked up 5 Angus bulls. Okay, top 5 Angus bulls that run at some stage in the DBI. Now it changes every so often. There's reruns of it, but just this is where they are. I'm only using them as an example, right? So the number 1 bull there is AA7485. I don't know who supplies him or what company or whatever, but just he's there anyway. And you can see there, right, that's his code, that's his breed. You go along, that's the number of beef calving records by him, his replacement index, etc. None of that matters to your reading, okay? What you want to start looking is down here where I'm circling, okay? You can see his DBI is 192, okay? And he's got 74% reliability. He's a relatively new bull, but he's very quite good, okay? And while the DBI is 192, his beef sub-index, which is an important figure, a lot more important than DBI, is 126, right? And if I was to say, right, what's the next thing I would look at if I had to impress a beef farmer, I'd be saying I'm looking at that carcass weight. Okay, so 17 kilos. And he's an excellent Angus, very good, excellent for carcass. Now, for yourself as a dairy farmer, there's two other things that matter to you. You want him short gestation, so he's minus 3.5 days, which is top end. And then you've got his calving difficulty. His calving difficulty is only 2.6%. Okay, so if I was to say, let's just look at that bull. Is he something that I think will impress both me from a dairy farmer point of view and me from a beef farmer point of view? I would say, yeah, he ticks a lot of boxes, that guy. Now, there isn't a huge number of records on him yet. He's 74% reliability, but look, obviously that will generate over time. Okay, so he's a top end Angus bull. 17 kilos would be at the higher end of things for carcass for Angus. Okay, and this next one here is an AA 4743, right? Is his tag, is his code. And if we look across, then his DBI is 177, so still very high in the DBI, and he's over 100 still in the beef sub index, so over 101. Right, so strong there. His gestation length is minus 3.4, almost identical to the previous bull, and his calving difficulty is only 2%. So it's identical again to in terms of calving difficulty to the previous bull. But look here, his carcass is only plus 2 kilos. Okay, so look, he's probably going to fatten up, probably at a lighter weight and fatten quite easily, but he's not going to deliver as much carcass probably as this bull up here. This bull is going to be far superior in terms of the kilos of carcass he's going to throw on whatever cow comes out. Okay. And then you can go down along through. It's the same the whole way down. Got a lot of these bulls be quite popular. 48, 49 are used. And you can see there, right? If you look at their DBI, they're 160s, 170s or thereabouts. The beef sub index is over 100, and that's where you need to be. But and they're in mid range then in terms of carcass, so they're 10, 12 kilos or thereabouts. Okay, they're fine in terms of the Angus breed. Obviously, if you move on to the likes of Charolais, Limousins, you're going to be pushing that up to 20, 30, 35 kilos of carcass. Okay, that's you can go with the Limousins and the Charolais and still keep a very moderate level of calving difficulty. If you're talking that level of carcass with the Continentals, you're going to be looking at probably 4%, 5% calving difficulty most of the lot. Okay, which is very acceptable on a mature cow, no problem. The only thing you'd have to keep an eye on is your gestation length, that they're not too far gone the other way in terms of gestation length. Okay, but that's what the main point I want to make here is when you pick your bulls, whether you're making the decision, your AI man's making the decision, or there's a rep from your company making the decision, you need to look, number one, I suppose the DBI draws you in, and then you need to check that beef sub index, check your gestation length and calving difficulty just to be sure they're within the threshold, and the carcass weight has to be high. You have to pick high carcass weight bulls. Picking bulls that are hovering down towards zero in terms of carcass weight is a big no-no nowadays. Okay. All right. So, Reece, how do we improve these traits, right? So we're just looking at two groups here, right? These are Holstein Friesians, DBI of 68, beef sub index is -3, euros, calving difficulty is low, obviously, with them, right? These are high index Anguses as a group. So the DBI was 121, the beef sub index is 107, and the calving difficulty is 3.7. And the low ones had a DBI of 165, but the beef sub index, 124, but the beef sub index was 65 euros only. So while they're very similar in terms of their DBI, they're quite different in terms of the beef sub index, right? So does it work, right? If we look across here, what would they come into, right? So this is some of the results from Grange. So the Holstein Friesians with a CBV of -1, they came into around 1530 at 23.5 months. 137-day finishing period, which would add extra cost, and there's a weight of 316 kilos of carcass. So they came into 1530, not a bad result for a Friesian. And the high index Anguses with a CBV of 95 came into 312 carcass, 70-day finish, and they made 1639. And the low ones with a CBV of 61, a weight of 294 kilos of carcass. So you can see there the 16, 17, 18 kilos of carcass in the difference, 18 kilos in the difference, and similar grade. They came into 1530. So look, on the day when you bought them, they probably looked the exact same. You'd say no different. If they're in a bunch, you definitely wouldn't pick them out for a while. But when you kill them, there's going to be, a good €100 in the difference between what they'll make at the end of the day. And there's probably not an awful lot in terms of the age of slaughter, the day's finishing, etc. They're quite similar. There's €100 there, and those calves, you probably wouldn't check much difference between them when you look at them. You probably pay the same price for them all. Okay. So how do you identify them, right? This is the CBV tool that I'm going to move into now, right? And this is going to show basically how you identify a good calf from a bad calf. So you see this caption here. It's got this calf in here as a Jersey. or is a Angus out of a Jersey. It's a low merit Angus out of a cow that's 25% Jersey, and the one below is a high merit Hereford out of a Frisian cow. Okay, and the difference in the CBV is €107, as you can see there. Right. So the CBV, what is it? Okay, it basically strips out. If you look back there, it strips out the calving subindex traits from the index. Okay, because basically they're not needed for a non-breeding animal. So if you're buying a calf, you don't care what the calving subindex traits were. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant here. All you care about is looking at carcass weight, carcass conformation, age of slaughter, and feed intake. Okay, they're your main ones, right? There is other things there like carcass weight, age of slaughter. Okay, they're small, but you know, the big ones there, the carcass weight, feed intake, and conformation. That's what's really going to drive the profitability of this animal. Okay, so what animals will get it? Commercial sucklers and uncalved females, dairy males and dairy beef males and uncalved females. Okay, the following then won't have it: pedigree beef males and females, and dairy females and calves females. Okay, so here we go then in terms of, right, what does a CBV look like? And okay, so we give it a star rating across the board, right? So if we look across all breeds, you can see that, you know, a 2-star is €35 and a 5-star is €265. But we move down to when you're a dairy farmer, what you're going to be producing. A 2-star is going to be, from a dairy beef, will be €45, and a 5-star will be anything €123 and over. A dairy, which is the Frisian generally, or the Jersey Frisian, or whatever it is, will be go from -1 for a 2-star up to €41 for a 5-star. Okay. So they'll change after each evaluation. So there's 6 evaluations every year. So you could see this flip-flopping a little bit from time to time. And that's just the way it's going to be. So this is what it looks like. If you click into CBV on ICBF and look at your herd profile, what you're going to see is, I suppose, a list of bulls with a CBV value. So you can see here, if you just look at these ones, you can see right, the top CBV there is a dairy beef when it's 110, and the bottom is a dairy when it's 44. Okay. So the carcass weight of it is 8.1 versus 0.2. So you can see the way it's weighting towards positive carcass traits and positive conformation traits. Okay. Now that's not to say that the fellow with these calves here who buys them can't make money. I mean, if these dairy ones are bought cheap enough, no problem making money out of them as well. I mean, a Frisian for €50 may be better value than paying 300 odd for a continental. You know, it depends on what the genetics are in the continental, what they're going to turn into. You know, it's not to say that low CBV calves can't be bought and turned into profit. They can. You just buy them for less. That's the theory. Okay. So if we look then at some of the results from Grange, we can see here that these are some of the Angus bulls are used. So the very low CBV ones, the bottom range of things, we're coming into a carcass of 285 versus 306 kilos for a 5-star one, or say a very good one. And there was 9 days shorter finishing period with them. Okay. So if we took, let's say, beef at 550 or 560 a kilo, which is what you probably get for an Angus, you'd be talking about in and around 120 odd euros, 110, 120 euros probably for of a difference there. And if you take it, let's around €4 a day, 450 a day in feed costs alone, excluding all fixed costs, you know, you're saving another 30 or 40 euros there. So the difference between the top and the bottom could be about 150 or 60 euros in the bottom line to a farmer when he slaughters these cattle. Okay, so calves basically with higher beef subindexes tend to produce higher CBV calves. You do have to pay attention to the slaughter or the carcass figure again. Ensure that is at the highest level you can get it at. The calves with high CBVs will have higher beef potential and more saleable calves. Okay, so I suppose, right, this is, I suppose, the two tools that should be used by dairy farmers to ensure that they do have saleable calves every single year. We're seeing what's happening. You know, that calf buyers are coming and going. They're not that, I suppose, regular. You know, you want to build a relationship with the farmer. This is a way of future-proofing your farm. Okay. Higher beef genetics, they're low cost. They don't cost you anything extra really to put in good beef genetics. The straws are all the same cost. The calving difficulty is no different. It's just a case that you have to make a small effort to actually look and ensure you're picking a good bull. The same goes with a stock bull. You can get the DBI in a stock bull and ensure that they have positive carcass traits. The stock bull is a bit of a challenge for us, we find, because people tend to, I suppose, pay sometimes maybe very little for stock bulls. And every herd is an opportunity add further value, I suppose, at very little cost. So basically, you're creating a bit of extra income for yourself, or you're allowing your calves to move a bit easier off your farm. And that's very, very important, especially in the climate we're in, because you do see a couple of weeks when the boat's not going, the calf price drops, and you're often trying to get calves moved for €5 in the market if you can, if you might be lucky to get it sometimes. So these are tools that can be used. As I said, they don't cost anything much really to you to do them. No extra expense on the farmer. And look, once you build up a name for yourself for having good calves, you generally have a queue of fellas outside with the trailer on a Saturday if you wanted to pick them up. Okay. So thank you very much.
Okay, super. Thanks very much, Alan. And we have Siobhan back on. So Siobhan, you can set up your slides there, and I'll just put one question that's come into you there, Alan. I suppose, where do you see the Jersey bull in the breeding going forward? And I'll group it with the next question as well. What is a bad carcass weight figure to watch out for?
Right. I'd say, look, yeah, the Jersey, if you have a crossbred herd, or let's say, I suppose a highly crossbred herd more than anything, you do really need to up your game in terms of the bulls you're picking. I mean, it depends on how severe the level of crossbreeding is within the herd. But if you're talking about, let's say, a beef maiden or a beef sub-index in your cows of, -20 or minus to -40, which is where some of the real Jersey herds might be, you're probably looking at using some fairly extreme bulls to try and counteract it to get a calf that's saleable. You're talking the likes of some of your Charlies like Lapon or something like that, where it's up in 40 kilos of carcass or thereabouts, which isn't hard calving either. It's only 5% calving difficulty. It's not actually hard calving, but you're trying to counteract it by ramping up the level of I suppose bull power you have. Using some of those Angus bulls that I've been showing there on extreme crossbred herds, well, I probably won't add a lot to you. You'll still have a very low CBV calf. And look, if the CJAX down as the mother, it tends to be a bit of an off-putting situation anyway. So you need to ensure that you're putting the best genetics you can into that cow to ensure that it's going to deliver at least a 4-star calf. You want to drive that thing on as hard as you can. The second question there is about low carcass bulls. Look, it depends on what within the breed, what breed you're picking. I mean, look, within an Angus, you'd be hoping that minimum of 10 kilos of carcass or Hereford. That's where you'd be going, I mean, if you're going into the likes of the Continentals, Limousines, Charolais, Blues, whatever, Albrechts, you're up on 20 plus, 20 to 30. And they're not hard calving. That's the best thing, There's a big range of bulls. If you look at the DPI, the real hard calving ones have been penalized heavily and have been pushed way down the list in terms of their ranking. So you can be fairly sure that picking any of these bulls, is not going to give you any major trouble. Now, keep an eye on the gestation length. Make sure that, if you are picking some of the Continentals, some of them do carry a little bit of time, a couple of days, maybe use them at the start, or maybe use them at the end or whatever you want to do. It depends. But you just have to kind of pick a team of bulls that suit your system and suit your farm. And it takes a little bit of thinking. You need to put as much thinking into picking bulls for beef as you do for picking bulls for dairy.
Okay, super. Thanks, Alan. Thanks a million for that. And just thanks to all our speakers as well tonight and to the audience. And just one scheme to make you aware of, which ties into the theme of tonight's scheme, is the Dairy Calf to Beef scheme, which is open at the moment for applications. It is closing date of 15th of May. And it very much ties into what Alan was covering tonight in his section, in that previously it was where the dairy beef calves were paid €20 per calf to weigh them, but now it's linking into genetics. So I suppose it's a payment of €20 per eligible calf up to a maximum of 50 calves. And it's the calves that are eligible are a male or female calf sired by a beef breed born to a dairy cow. So the beef breed has to be genotyped. And so whether you use your stock bull or AI straws, they have to be genotyped, a minimum 3 stars on DBI and a minimum 3 stars on the beef sub index of the DBI. So very much tying into what Alan was covering there, drilling into that DBI index. And I suppose there is a scheme there now to reward the dairy farmers for picking bulls that'll generate a better beef calf off of the dairy cow. I suppose all of our questions have been answered. And thanks very much to all our speakers tonight and to all of you for tuning in and listening to us tonight. I hope you got something from it. And I suppose if you would like to discuss anything further on anything that's been covered tonight, or if you would like to have a look at your breeding plan and some of the bulls you've picked for this year's breeding season, do feel free to contact myself, Claire McAuliffe. You'll find me in the Teagasc Listowel office. Okay, so look, thanks to all our speakers and to all of you tonight. All the best, and I hope you enjoyed it. Take care. Bye bye.